We have arrived. This is Webb Parton, your host, and we welcome you to the Free Range Dogs podcast. This is a place where we stake out a shady spot and talk about all things dog. Find yourself a soft piece of grass, spin a few circles, plop down, rest your feet, and join us in this joyful conversation. Greetings, everyone. This is Webb Parton here with another episode of Free Range Dogs, where we explore the wonderful world of all things dog. Today, we're with Rob Breeding, a friend of many years, and I'm going to bring him in now, let him introduce himself. Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself and what dogs have meant in your life.
Hi, Webb. I'm a professor of journalism at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. I've worked as a journalist or as a journalism educator for decades now, and I write a weekly column for the Flathead Beacon newspaper up in Kalispell, Montana, called Out of Bounds. I do some outdoor journalism and outdoor writing, working on a book right now about my first bird dog, Jack, who you know I got Jack from you way back when I lived in Arizona.
Yeah, and you currently share your life with two dogs, with Doll and with Jade, correct? Both, and they're old blood Ryman setters.
They're both from Setters West in Lewistown, Montana. They're sort of Rymanish.
Okay.
I don't think they don't describe them as, pure Ryman dogs. Mm-hmm. And we also have a cat, Laney.
Well, what house would not be complete without a cat in the mix?
Yes. So yeah. That cat has played a role in what's happening with my dogs now. So,
yeah.
Doll is 13, and after a magnificent career as a hunting dog, she is retired now. Mm-hmm. And just Jade and I are hunting. But the presence of Laney allows sort of a fairly painless departure when Jade and I go hunting.
Okay.
She's not alone, and it's a big deal for her.
Yeah. And that's so hard for a dog when they hit that certain age, and
yes,
they just can't go anymore. Yeah.
Right.
We all get there at some point.
Yeah, she hunted 3 years ago. She was still hunting great. 2 years ago, she started, Jade took over last year. We didn't even take her out. But she's enjoying just being a house dog now.
Yeah. Well, I've got fond memories. I spent a day with you on the Shoshone, and you were guiding at that point out of Cody, fly fishing. And I remember Jade in the boat and with us, or
Doll.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely
right. Right.
Doll in the boat with us.
Yes.
And I thought, gee, what a neat. I worked for so many years with dogs, but it, was a trailer with, 8 or 10 of them on board. And they were, I typically see the back end of a dog every few minutes, Yeah. But, that's sort of the classic thing. You think of the German Jägermeisters, with their dog, and, someone who lives a particular lifestyle or an occupation, and they've got that dog that's involved in that occupation or lifestyle. And the bond that develops is just so profound.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you're guiding, you can't bring your dog along.
Oh, so you left her behind. Yeah. Oh my goodness. She must have had evil eyes for you.
But the dog gets used to going in the boat. You like having your dog around all the time, and that's part of the, building that bond. Mm-hmm. The thing I learned with Jack, the first of the 3 English setters I've had, is that if you want to have a really good English setter boat dog, get a lab instead. It really is kind of counter to their nature. You think about the way the dogs, when they do their job, a lab sits in a blind quietly and has these brief or not necessarily brief, but they have these flurries of activity followed by chilling out and waiting until the next flight of birds comes through. With the English setter, they're running all day.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit against their nature, but the main thing that really works with training a setter to be a good boat dog is to wait till they get a little bit older, because they just have so much energy when they're young. It's hard to settle them down. But 5, 6, 7, they chill out, and it's important to make sure they have a bed or some kind of, you have something in the boat that they know is their spot.
Mm-hmm. Would she, if you were bank fishing, if you were walking the edge of a river or something, would she stay with you and wait on you while you were casting? Or would she be out there working the bushes?
Both Jack and Doll would, when they were young, they would do the setter thing. They're outdoors. They want to go find birds. Mm-hmm. That's hard. You can't really manage your dog and fish at the same time. Especially in the case of Doll, because we fished a lot together later on. And she got to the point where she would sit quietly on the bank and just chill with me. And if I caught a fish, she'd get right in. She'd be really interested. But that was not something she could do when she was younger.
Okay.
I was thinking about some interesting stories with both Jack and Doll while we were out fishing. And after I was living in Flagstaff when I got Jack from you, and we were there for about a year and a half, and then we moved to Pocatello, Idaho. And right after we moved to Pocatello, and this is when Jack was about a year and a half, maybe not quite 2 years old, and he was a rambunctious dog. We drove up to Montana to meet Bill Watt, who you know, and to fish on the Big Hole River. And we were kind of hurrying because the weather had warmed, and we knew the river was likely to blow out later that day. And we tried to hurry and get in fishing in the morning. And I had the twins with me that day too. Their mother was working, and so I had 2 8-year-olds with me. We got to the river, and I let Jack out, and he just went kind of like a setter that age does, and was pretty wild. I remember at one point he climbed out onto this big pile of driftwood and was like standing on the edge of it, looking over the river, kind of like Mustafa in The Lion King. He was so dang proud of himself. But then a little bit later, and the river was coming up, we were kind of looking at the river going, we're not going to be able to fish today. But while we were doing that, Jack noticed a Tweety bird across the river.
Oh boy.
And he was racing up and down, and then he plunged in the river to get across. And it was a river on the rise. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget, it was too much for him. He was young. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. And literally the 4 of us, my young daughters, watched his little white head drift all the way down the river and around a bend.
Oh boy.
And was gone. And it was a little scary. And fortunately, a few minutes later, he came running up on the far bank.
And how did you get him back across?
Bill and the twins stayed there and kind of kept his attention, and I went back to the car, and I had to drive downstream to the next bridge and get across, and then drive back up. And it was all private on that bank, and I kind of approximated where I thought he was, and found somebody who let me, go across that place to go. And he was there in the river right across the bank from Bill and the twins, barking his head off. So that was early on. And then there was another time later in his life, I took him fishing with me. We were waiting on the South Fork of the Flathead River, downstream way up above Hungry Horse Reservoir. It's one of the only places you're allowed to hunt fish for bull trout.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very similar experience. We're fishing, and at this point he was calm and was just kind of hanging out, but he saw a dipper, a little bird on the far bank doing that little thing where they dip in and walk around in the water, and he lost it again. And this wasn't a scary thing. It was just funny. You know, the setters just don't have a whole lot of buoyancy.
Mm-hmm.
And once it got in over his head,
mm-hmm.
his back end just dropped straight down, and all of his pedaling action was just keeping his nose above water rather than actually getting him anywhere.
And did he ever develop the ability to swim well in calm water and lake water or stream?
He was okay, but they never really swam. The
mm-hmm.
water was something that they only for all of my setters. It's only something they encounter if there's something else going on that they have to
mm-hmm.
get to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not interested.
Yeah, yeah. I had one female tricolor, and
mm-hmm.
she early on, very young, you know, we were up near Flagstaff, up at Fry Park, and Nicole and I, you know, early on, we would go up during the summer, and we just mm-hmm. set up a camp there, and we'd bring a chain gang, and we'd just run a string of dogs, and we'd stay up there while it was hot, and
right.
you know, might be up there a month or so.
Yes,
and there were little ponds here and there,
mm-hmm.
and one of them had quite a bit of bulrushes. And there were blackbirds in those bulrushes, nesting in the bulrushes in the pond. They had little woven nests up in the top. Yeah. And so she sees these birds out there, and she's going to get them. And tentatively, she goes in the water, and she's trying to swim and gets out and gets into the cattails, which was deep water. And proceeds to knock one or two nests down, you know. And
mm-hmm.
from that point on, for the rest of her life, you couldn't keep her out of water. And she would swim like a cork. And I think it was, you know, her whole intent was to try and find this, you know, manna from heaven, these birds, you know, falling in the water around her.
Right.
I had a red setter once that swam pretty well. But mm-hmm. you're right, they don't. They didn't quite get that gene, you know, when the
right.
card deck
right.
was being shuffled out.
Right. Yeah. Doll is, you know, if we're out hunting and there's water around, it's just not something she even notices. If she's working through water, she doesn't care about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're at the house, if the sprinklers are on, or the sprinklers have been on in the morning,
mm-hmm.
and she has to walk across that wet grass, she'll sometimes act the way a dog acts the first time you put boots on it.
Mm-hmm.
Walk across it without putting a foot on the ground. So
mm-hmm.
it's kind of, that's just sort of quirky setter behavior. They're
mm-hmm.
Fussy about some things, and they don't care about others.
Right. Well, you've had quite a transition. I mean, in Arizona, desert quail.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then, you know, shifting, Pocatello was probably Hunn's sharptails, mountain grouse, I'm guessing.
We hunted a lot of sharptails when we were there. Where Jack really got his bird thing worked out is, across the street from our house, there was a hillside, a sage-covered hillside that had Huns on it.
Mm.
And we were in the city limits. We weren't hunting them, but we just went out and just about every day, because there was a couple of coveys there, and almost every day we could go out and find wild birds and point, and he'd mm-hmm. find them and get a point, and they'd flush, and we'd get a second point out of it, and then after that second flush, they'd fly into one of the neighbors' backyards who had some big cedar trees. And so it was great practice for Jack, but Jack was my first bird dog, so it was also my training.
Mm-hmm.
And I was learning how to understand what he was doing and to trust him,
mm-hmm.
to understand that he had figured out the bird thing. That those birds, those huns right across the street were invaluable for his development as a bird dog and my development as a bird dog partner.
Mm-hmm.
We also hunted those Colombian sharptails a lot when we were there. And those were also a great bird for a young learning dog and a bird dog partner who was learning how to read a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Those sharptail are pretty consistent as well, that you find them, they hold really well, they flush, and they almost always are exactly where they land after that first flush. And then the second flush, they usually get up and fly out of the county.
Mm-hmm.
But that was really good for us. And then we moved after 2 years to Kalispell. And I was worried about not having these wild birds. But the first morning we woke up in our new place in Kalispell, it was it was spring. I woke up and I heard pheasant crowing on the hillside behind the house. And I went out and looked out the backyard, and Jack was sitting on the deck staring at the hillside. So we were really lucky to have a lot of birds. And Doll, when she came along, she got a lot of practice on those same birds.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and I know you had, because when you went to Wyoming, then you were hunting chukar a lot with Doll.
Yes. And that for Doll, Jack was probably in his second, third year. He was really hunting well. And Doll she was a later bloomer. It was really her fourth season before she really kind of got focused and stopped screwing around.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on chukar. We lived in a place and we had wild birds 15, 20 minutes from the house. I could get out of class early in the afternoon and run up and get a 2-hour hunt in. And she really came of age there. Those happen to be, it's Wyoming. There's not a lot of bird hunters in Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
They were not heavily hunted birds. And so they were like hunting big quail. And by big quail, like bobs or Mearns quail, and that they held for points really well for the dogs. They weren't constantly running uphill like chukar are legendary for.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great time. Doll and I ended up, we ended up getting our quail slam in her 10th year. We finally got a mountain quail up near Wrightwood. We hunted together in 9 different states, a lot of different birds. She really had a great career. It's just such a great dog to hunt over, such a great dog to be around.
Mm-hmm.
She's been just sort of the nicest, friendliest animal, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like Doll.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Jack was like that too, but of course he was a boy, and
he was a bit of a wild child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now Jade she's 3 years old. And I feel like, dang, she is the most mature at an early age of the 3 of them. She really settled in pretty quick. And we had a little bit of the Velociraptor year when she was, a year or 2, but she has settled down. And even right now, as you and I talked, I broke my leg this spring, and so I haven't been able to get her out much, and she's really handled that well. The fact that we've just been housebound a lot this spring.
Yeah.
So I'm getting better now, and I'm getting mobile, and I'm going to have to get her out and get her working again. I want her to be in shape for the fall, but she could have really, it wouldn't have surprised me if she had a lot of trouble with this inactivity, but she's been really good.
Mm-hmm. And what are you going to have there where you're at now? Is it pheasant, bobwhites?
We have pheasant and bobwhite near here where I live. The sharptail and prairie chickens are a little farther out. I've got to go north and west to get into them. I've been here in Nebraska for 5 years, and I have not hunted the prairie grouse, primarily because Doll, as she got older, was just not able to hunt the early stuff anymore. That was kind of the first thing that when I saw her slowing down was when it was hotter, warmer in the early season, she just couldn't go.
Yeah.
And so she was 8 when we moved here, and we tried that a couple of times, but it was hard for her. And then by November, when it had cooled off, we had pheasant and bobwhite nearby, so we haven't really targeted them that much.
Mm-hmm.
But the season opens here the last week of October generally, and we hunt pheasant early in that, and then the first few weeks and everybody says the same thing everywhere I've gone. You should have been here in the old days when it was great. Mm-hmm. Well, we go out in the opening week around here in Nebraska, and there are a lot of birds.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't get a limit of pheasant, it's because my inconsistent shooting has betrayed me once again, not because we didn't find birds.
Uh-huh.
So I tend to hunt those primarily early in the season, and then we just kind of, by the end of November, I really start focusing just on hunting quail, because I really love hunting quail, and it's my thrill for bird hunting. They're the birds I love to work on. They're just pheasant that just get in the way in that early part of the season.
Yeah, I was in Nebraska, and I was hunting with some gentleman. It was a sort of an arranged kind of a thing, and I meet him. We go out, and he was running English pointers, and I remember him. He just had a disdain for pheasants. He was a quail guy, and though that was the one true bird, and he referred to pheasants as ditch parrots. Those damn ditch parrots,
Yes.
So I understand what you're saying.
I don't have any disdain for them. I just love hunting quail.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like hunting pheasant.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have the choice, I do the thing I love versus the thing I just really like. And they're great birds, and they're exciting, and big rooster getting up in front of you. That's just, it's a wonderful, it's a hoot. But as the season settles down, I really like to just try to find bobs, and there aren't a lot.
Yeah,
I can usually find them, and I hunt what the limited public ground there is here in Nebraska, which means sometimes you're hunting a section that's a waterfowl production area, and you know that after you hunt it a few times, you know there's 2 covey on that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And you get one here and there, and you keep an eye on the population, and then when it gets too low, you just stop.
Yeah.
You leave those alone. So, it's not, I miss when I was in Arizona. I want to get back to Arizona, get to go out on Merns or gambles, and we can park the truck and we can hunt all day and just walk.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Lukens, who the Arizona guy, he has family in Nebraska, so he's come up the last couple of seasons, and we've hunted together up here. And he describes hunting in Nebraska as kind of like participating in a bass tournament. You drive to a spot, get out, do your thing, get in the car, drive to another one.
Right.
It's different.
Yeah.
But they're birds, and they're wild birds, and it's a wild bird is wonderful no matter where it is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, talk with me a little bit about what living with your dogs in that deep a connection has meant for you. Could you imagine your life without your setters?
I can't, and I got a divorce. Boy, it's been about 10 or 15 years ago. And I have, I haven't remarried. I'm not sure I'm going to, and I do live alone. And I kind of like that to a degree. And the presence of my dogs and the relationship I have with them is a really big part of being comfortable doing that for me. And some people, I know people, I've dated some women since I got my divorce who are pretty focused on finding somebody and getting married again. And they need to have somebody with them. And I don't feel like I need that, but having the dogs and now the cat really makes that comfortable for me. I know it's, in one hand, it's kind of silly, but when I go to work in the morning, I say goodbye to the dogs and tell them I'll be back in a couple hours.
And they listen to you, no doubt.
They listen to me. Yes, yeah. They're clearly aware that I'm talking to them. I don't believe they're able to interpret the meaning of all the words, but it's a close and wonderful relationship, and I'm happy having them around. This spring, when I hurt my leg and I was literally, fortunately I was able to go back to work and continue teaching after I only had a week off from work when I had surgery. But if I wasn't at school teaching, I was home in bed with my leg up in the air. And April wasn't a fun month. And having the three of them, the two dogs and now the cat, which I think thinks she's a dog too, there's a lot of comfort provided by that nice, gentle presence. And setters are such, more than any of the other breeds I've owned, that just sort of connect with you in a way that I think is pretty profound. There are times when they show you that they're not just reacting out of some instinct or some need to get fed, but that they really care about your attention and your involvement with them. Yeah.
Well, and they probably were watching over you pretty tight when you were hurt.
Yes, and I picked up in the case of Jade, I think an awareness that on her part that I was injured. Doll is at a point where she's not, I know she would have been, but at her age, she's just different now and how she reacts to me. But Jade seemed to be, and I'm sure that to a degree I'm projecting some of my thinking about the dog and what the dog must be thinking when I look at them. But at the same time, I think it's also true that they understand certain things. They understand what's going on some level. They're not just a instinct-driven animal that's constantly responding to what their immediate need is, but they're contemplative and aware as well. And I think you also see that with the really good hunting dogs. They understand, on some level, they're understanding the idea of how they find the birds and how they point the birds and wait for me and I catch up, and that they're not just driven by some instinct to go on point, though surely that is a factor in what's happening, but that are understanding how we get to success as well.
Yeah, I know when I was guiding, I would have a group and our first string, so to speak, would be 10 or 12 dogs, that were, ready to go and finished out. And typically, because we would breed generations of dogs. So typically in any generation, there would be a lead female and a lead male. And that lead female would sort of ride shotgun over everything that happened with all the females in the yard. And that male would provide the service. He'd ride shotgun with, so they didn't have to get through me. They had to go through them before they got through me, to me.
Right.
And I know that, God, it can be so profound how intuitive and how deep a dog's connection can be.
Right.
During one of those generations, I had a female setter named Beryl, and Beryl was my dog in her mind. I mean, she was the lead dog. Okay. And in truth, when I'd hunt her, I mean, I'd have dogs on the ground. So I might have a single or a brace on the ground. And then I'd have Beryl almost like a non-slip retriever. She'd come along with me, And part of that was I didn't want her running too big, because if she was going to be running all day, there needed to be something left at the end of the day,
Yes.
I couldn't put her up again. And she kind of knew that. But if, and I remember one hunt, we had 2 short hairs on the ground, and she was along with me, and she's kind of, she acted like an intermediary, because she would monitor what the short hairs were doing. And I'd be back there, and I had 2 shooters with me, 2 clients. So I'm kind of watching the clients, and I didn't need to watch the short hairs, because Beryl would tell me when they were on point, And if they missed a bird, she would back up and go point it. And it was, there wasn't, the guys that were with me didn't catch that. They didn't understand that. They just saw a dog that wasn't quite hunting,
Right.
But she was doing so much more. And it was about that connection. Yeah. And I know that, I had some health stuff a while back here, and, that's when we lost Beryl. But, they get so connected.
Yes.
And they knew I was sick. And still to this day, because we lost Beryl, and, we brought in a little German Wirehair female. And we're down to 3 dogs now. Shock and amazement. Life's gotten very quiet. But this little girl went through, a bad couple of years with me, when I was really sick. And, every morning I go and I sit on the sofa, take blood pressure and take my meds and wait for the microwave to beep to tell me the oatmeal's done. And every morning she comes in and hops up on the sofa, sits beside me, comes right into my face and smells my breath. She's checking. Are you everything good today? Are we? Yeah. Everything all right? And with her, and then we have a lab here, Drake. But they got to touch you. They got to lay part of their body on you. They right. That need for connection is so profound with them.
Right.
And when I was training, because I would see everything, the dogs would come in, and the best dogs are the dogs that have that. When they're allowed to bond, when they're allowed to be connected to their human, that's when you get a partner.
Right.
And just like you and Jack and Doll and Jade, when you're doing something together that you love, then it's the best of all worlds.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily find humans that all the time that like hunting birds as much as I do, but I have a couple of dogs that definitely do.
Yeah. Well,
so I had mentioned to you, I have a book project I've been kind of working on called Jack's Last Hunt. It's about Jack, and it's kind of a memoir of family stuff and what was going on. But after we talked yesterday, and I've been working on this, I got back to it in summer. It's time for me to do some writing, and I revised a chapter, and I recalled, and you probably remember this, after I got Jack and I moved north, and he got a little bit older, and suddenly he seemed uncontrollable there. For about 6 months, he was, you called me one day, and I probably remember this. I think Nicole was driving, and you were driving home from somewhere, and you spent about an hour on the phone with me that day describing your training methods and the way you work with dogs. And you sent me some stuff that you had written about that, and I listened and I read that stuff, and I remember thinking after it was all over, it was like, and it all made perfect sense. And you were working as a guide, and when you're guiding, you have to have dogs that are right on top of things. They can't, they have to be ready, and clients expect that. But I remember after we talked and I read that stuff, I just thought to myself, there's no way I can do this. It's so intense. It's so intricate. Everything that you would describe, like I said, it all made sense, but I thought, I'm just not wired for that. And so I kind of rolled the dice with Jack and just worked through things with him. And I've been lucky with all three of my setters, and that all of them reached a point fairly quickly where they got it. I never had to worry about a dog that didn't point. And Jack, I learned with those Huns, and I didn't really train him. I didn't have to do anything to it. We just started finding those birds, and he just started pointing them. I was reading back. I kind of came up with the three tenets of, for me, for training a bird dog, which is not really training at all. But the first was just making sure you've got a dog that comes from the hunting line that has that bred into them. And that's, everything else might be pointless if you get, say, one of those Irish setters that is an AKC dog and not a hunting dog anymore. You might not ever be able to fix him. But start with that. And then find a way to put the dog on wild birds as much as possible, as early as possible. And that means living in a place where there are birds. And I've also been relatively lucky for all three of those dogs in that formative period. I've had places I could go where we could just go walk around and they could do that thing. And then finally, I kind of stole this from a Teva sandal, but I think they stole it for somebody else, is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And to be okay with that. And Jack was a great example of that. The first couple of years when he was really hunting well, he never retrieved. But he would diligently find and point dead. We never lost a bird. But he would find that bird, that dead bird, and he'd go hard on point and wait for me to come pick it up. And I was like, well, do I want to send him out for force fetching or something? Or can I just be good with this because we're doing fine? And I was. And so I did. And then one day again, I was hunting in Arizona with Dave. Again, we were hunting Mearns quail, and Jack was running with two of Dave's Brittany's, and Dave's dogs were really good retrievers. And he watched that. Jack would point, the Brittany's would point. We were finding birds, we were putting birds on the ground, but Brittany's always ran over and retrieved them. And then the next day, Jack and I went out and hunted by ourselves, and went on point, found some birds, miracle of miracles. They went on flesh, and I put one on the ground for him. He ran over, picked up that bird, ran up to me, and sat down right in front of me and retrieved every single bird I shot over him after that.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it was, that moment was just so amazing and incredible. And again, when I mentioned that the idea that they understand something about what we're doing. That was a dog that spent a day learning from two other dogs, and then put what it learned in action the next day. Doll, I didn't have to teach that dog to point. but she has always been funny in that sometimes she'll be like, she finds birds and she's in classic tight down nose close to the ground, classic point paw up. And then other times I'll know she's on point because she's just standing in one spot and hasn't moved.
Mm-hmm.
She might even be looking back at me, and I'm like, oh, she must not be birds, and I get over there. And
yeah, and it might be the type of scent she's getting, or how much scent she's getting, or it might be what she's getting in the scent. Because I think that dogs, when they smell bird scent, they're not smelling a single thing, meaning okay, they're getting a bird that's nervous and has moved and is probably a juvenile, probably a female. You notice how some days you shoot all hens, some days you shoot all males, or for the morning, you kill 6 birds and they're all hens, and then it switches and the next 5 birds are male. I mean, so
yeah.
So there's something happening there that we don't get. We humans are so olfactorily challenged that there's just stuff we don't understand. But with Jack, the thing is, if you had forced the issue and you had said, damn it, that dog's going to bring me that bird, and you'd put him on a table and you try some sort of force breaking, and that would have been it for him, because the goal in dog training, if you're living with your dog, is to have everything in the dog at the end that was there in the beginning. And if you have to, force breaking has some positive, good structural components to it. But it's a thing you need to be real careful with. It's kind of like using e-collars, they're really effective, but it's like, cutting diamonds with a sledgehammer. You really got to know what you're doing,
Right.
But he decided, watched those Brits retrieving, and he decided he was going to do it. I had 2 sisters that I'd hunt them together, and they had cut a deal early on, 2 setters. One retrieved, one didn't. So when I'd have those 2 dogs on the ground, they worked very well together. They would work off each other's points. One would come in and down air and point the birds, and the other dog would go around off the air, so they weren't getting anything, but get above the birds and just, lock up so the birds couldn't go anywhere. I have pictures where I'm walking in, have shooters sending in on a point, and you have 2 dogs 25 yards apart pointing each other. And there's a covey of birds in the middle, Now, if you put that dog down with another dog other than her sister, she'd retrieve every bird, but she wouldn't pick up a bird around her sister. And so it was just some deal they had struck,
Right. Right.
So there's a lot that happens when you live with the dog, and a lot of it, is subject to interpretation,
Right.
So much of a dog's world makes perfect sense to them, and we just can't understand it. But that doesn't change anything,
Yeah. I think that we get, along with it, as I mentioned before, they're training us, and they're not thinking about it like a teacher the way I think about teaching at school, but they're just doing their thing, and we're learning to read them. Jade has been so much easier than Doll or Jack, and some of that is surely because of the dog she is, but a big part of it is also what I learned from Jack and Doll, and my willingness or my ability to foresee the fact that the dog is coming along, and when they're a year old, they're not going to be finished, and that's the deal. That's just the way it's going to be. And I'm much more relaxed with Jade. I misused the e-collar with Jack as I was learning and trying, and I used it some with Doll. but I learned a lot. I haven't had an e-collar on Jade, and the only reason I've thought about doing it is she sometimes is prone to barking when she's out in the yard and neighbors are walking by.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a bark collar or something. In terms of hunting, it's just not even something that I think about. She's out there pointing out. The only flaw in her game at 3 years old is she's still working on the retrieving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We either lost some birds or lost some opportunities because sometimes has been prone to pick them up and not hang on to them.
Mm-hmm.
We made a lot of progress with that last year. The last quail we killed in January was just a great retrieve on her part. After a great retrieve, she ran over, grabbed it, picked it up, and I wasn't too far behind her, so she didn't have to walk it too far. But she's been a little bit sketchy in that, and I sometimes wonder, we got the cat by accident. She was a kitten that I found running across a street, and I picked it up with the idea that I'd find someplace to find a home for it. And
mm-hmm.
basically, Doll said, "Thank you, I've always wanted a cat. You can't."
Yeah.
She's not leaving.
Yeah.
But when the cat was young, Jade would like to pick it up and carry it around the house, by the back of its neck. And it was kind of weird. And I didn't encourage it. And I tried to stop her from doing that. And I don't know if that,
that might have been some sort of a negative she perceived, made her nervous. Yeah.
Right. So we're working through it. And the thing that's important for me about working with my dogs, that thing about, don't let the perfect get in the way. And what I'm able to do now that I was not able to do because I didn't know what I was doing at all with Jack was relax when they did something wrong, and work through it and not freak out about it and slow down. And Jade and I did that a few times. I recall at one point I killed the bird. It was wounded. She didn't get on it immediately. But I knew it was there basically not far. It hadn't gotten up and flown, and had to keep bringing her back. Just keep bringing her back. And it took us 20 minutes to find that bird, but found it. And instead of freaking out about the fact that she didn't grab it in the first place, I just worked her back. And then when she found it, I told her she was the greatest thing that had ever existed on this planet. English setters, and I think all dogs respond to their partner, their human, acting that way when they do something.
Praise. Yeah. Yep. And if I can offer something, it's the difficult part of dog training is not training dogs, it's training ourselves. It's monitoring your own internal emotions and what you're projecting and what you're feeling at any given moment. Because, folks will think that they can somehow maneuver or mask when they're feeling frustrated or angry or concerned or upset. And you can't. Dogs know that. They pick it up. And so in a canine culture, they respect confidence. They respect leadership that is assured and calm, and deliberate, And what you're describing, is you're saying that you don't, it's not as important to you anymore because it's going to be okay. Even if the dog's just going to point the bird, it's still going to be okay. And early on, you probably didn't feel that. You were thinking, well, gosh, okay. And the dog doesn't know why you're feeling, concerned or apprehensive or unsure, but they just know that when they're around you and a bird, that's how you feel. And they don't like it when you feel that way. So it's better we just push that thing under a bush and get on and find another one that I can point, We need to learn that as humans. We just,
Something you told me when we were talking about Jack all those years ago that I never forgot, and I always think about now, was you told me that they can smell it when you're upset. They can smell that on you. They, and I thought about it, and of course they can. They understand the world through that nose in a way we can barely even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But that was something that you said that has always stuck with me, and you can't mask it, but you can learn to not get upset in the first place.
Right.
It's all going to be good.
Well, there's a certain Zen kind of prospect. If you're going to train dogs, if you're going to live with a dog, if you're going to hunt with a dog, if you're going to have a dog in the bow of your boat, there's a certain Zen kind of assurance that you feel, that you need to feel. And part of it, I think, is just that, life is so short. I mean, it's so short that why do a thing that makes you apprehensive or concerned or unsure, or why not just choose to be grateful, to praise the dog, to feel connection with the dog, to enjoy the moment. I mean, all that sort of silly Hallmark stuff you'd read in a card somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's really true. And I think, I'm pushing 70. I got a few years left, but it took time to do that, we just got to work through it.
Yeah. I think if dogs knew how to read, they would be suckers for those Hallmark cards.
Yeah.
They're much simpler in terms of being happy and what makes them happy. It's not complicated with them in the way it can be in our human relations. And you give them praise, and you celebrate the things they do right. And sometimes I use words to explain to them what they did wrong, and I know they don't understand the words, but I think they understand the tone, and they understand the calmness about it. They've already figured out it wasn't what they were supposed to do, and they work it out. They sort it out if you give them the space to do that. A good, smart dog is gonna be the dog that you want and need if you give it the time to figure itself out.
And I think there's one push beyond that, because there are times when I've been the mistaken one. And the dogs knew better.
Yes.
Yes. And they look at you and they listen to you and they say, "Oh, so you want me to do X?" Well, that's because you don't know what the hell you're doing here. So they go over and pick up the bird, or they, go to a certain spot and they point a bird or whatever. Because I was obviously confused, and they'll be the bigger being about it, and give me the benefit of the doubt, and that's kind of a humbling thing. But that's part of it too, it's a partnership, and sometimes they're right,
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Most of the time they're right. Yeah. They're better at living than we are in many instances.
I know who the weakest link is in our hunting partnership. And he walks on two legs. Yeah.
Well, after I was from my brief sabbatical from the world, after I came back and I couldn't shoot, and I tried to get the dogs out on quail, and I couldn't hit anything, couldn't walk too fast. And I'd go out and scout at fine birds, and she did everything right. I just couldn't kill any for her, But to her, even that didn't matter, you know?
Yep.
And I think that's the gift and the lesson in the whole process is that they know how to be a partner. You know, they know how to bond. And they're very deliberate and gentle in instructing us on how to be better at that sort of thing. Yeah. Well, you had talked about a book you're thinking about. Do you want to put a plug in on it and talk a little bit about it?
Well, it's like, as I mentioned, it's called, my working title is Jack's Last Hunt. I've written, I think, about 35,000 words. It's not a long story, but I've written it, and I've just been reworking it, and during the summers when I have time to get to it. And it's about that life with Jack, and that his lifetime overlapped, you know, when that period when we left Arizona, and eventually led to my wife and I getting a divorce and changing a lot with our family. And so it kind of covers both of those things. Mm-hmm. And I do, because of some happenstance, I have a very clear recollection of the last time we hunted together. Mm-hmm. It was a really great day in the Verde Valley in Arizona, and it was kind of a windy day, but he just got on birds and figured it out. And I remember watching him hunt, work and scent, and finally finding birds. And I think we got 3 or 4 gambles that day, but it was just this part of the end of the afternoon where he just hunted so perfectly. And he got, in the subsequent year, he got really sick and didn't make it to the next hunting season. Yeah. And I was was living in Wyoming at that time, and that last hunt was when we were down in Arizona visiting, and he passed away before the next season, and I ended up he's on a spot in Wyoming, this overlook where we hunted checker, and the subsequent fall after this had all happened, and Dalla and I were hunting together, and I kind of reached into the back of my vest, and I found I had one shell left over from that last hunt, which is now epoxied to a rock with his name tag on that spot in that checker country in Wyoming. Yeah, but I learned so much from that dog. I learned how to be a bird hunter with that dog. And I also learned how to deal with divorce and being a father for my daughters after divorce. And Jack was a part of their lives when they were young. And it's a story, kind of the story of my life in that period. Once I get this one done, then I'm moving on to Doll.
Well, and you haven't completed that last chapter yet with her, so you still got some time to enjoy her.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doll will be about that effort to try to get all 6 quailed, because we did that together, and that was something that we spent a lot of time on. Mm-hmm. And you and I talked about that a lot when I was trying to find mountain quail in Southern California. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We figured it out, though.
All right. It's time to say goodbye to our folks out there. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for listening in. And we sure appreciate you. Please do hit the subscribe button. It does help us quite a bit. Now, we have a new podcast coming out every couple weeks. We have blogs coming out as well. There's stuff on the website, so do a visit there and take a look around. I look forward to talking with you or talking at you in the new future. And with that, we're going to say goodbye. If you like this episode, I invite you to visit our website, freerangedogs.com. It's where you can find the stuff you need to live the free-range dog lifestyle. I want to help you with that. book a consultation call or an in-person training, attend one of our ongoing events, or join our online membership program. We got it all on freerangedogs.com. All right, it's time to head back to the truck and the water bucket for the thirsty dogs. This is Webb Parton signing off, wishing you the boundless joy that comes when you share the outdoors with your best friend.